Hey everyone, welcome to my waiting room, the place where I sip tea with mortality and occasionally laugh at it, like it's an awkward dinner guest who just won't leave. If you're watching this, maybe something in my story feels familiar. Maybe you've been here. Maybe you're afraid you might be. Maybe someone you love already is. I remember the morning it all began like it was 5 minutes ago and also like it was someone else's life. It started as just another day, a routine checkup on my calendar. I was more worried about where I'd park than what I'd hear. But that afternoon, in a tiny office with a calm voice and a quiet clipboard, my life split in two before the diagnosis and after. If you want to keep living, you'd better listen to the whole story. Please like and subscribe to follow me every day. This journey is a long one, and I don't want to take it alone. Drop a comment below with your city and what time it is where you're watching, because this waiting room, it's not just mine anymore, it's ours. Now, let me tell you my story. It just might be the motivation we both need to keep going. I woke up late that morning, which feels absurd now considering everything. The alarm had gone off 3 times. I hit snooze with the confidence of someone who thought they had time. The sun was already pressing its way through my blinds like it was trying to slap me awake. I groaned, pulled my comforter over my face, and checked my phone. Tuesday, 9:42 a.m. My calendar notification glowed annual checkup Dr. Han 11:00 a.m. I rolled my eyes. Another one of those adult tasks where the doctor tells you to sleep more, stress less, and stop eating like a raccoon. I showered, brushed my teeth, gave myself the usual pep talk in the mirror. Nothing looked wrong, no alarms blaring, no sad music. Just another average day with average expectations. I drove to the clinic with a podcast playing, one of those overly cheerful ones about productivity. Maximize your minutes, it chirped. Take control of your day. I was halfway through a segment about waking up at 5 a.m. like a billionaire when I pulled into the parking lot. The waiting room smelled like disinfectant and old magazines. Beige chairs, beige walls, beige existence. A woman across from me was knitting something navy blue, probably a sweater for someone who still believed in winter. I checked in, sat down, scrolled my phone. I looked around at everyone else waiting and wondered if they felt it too, that weird tightness in your chest when the world feels too quiet. Then the nurse called my name, and everything after that felt like stepping into a slow motion reel. Blood pressure, temperature, urine sample. I cracked a joke about how many cups I'd peed in this year. The nurse smiled politely. It wasn't her first rodeo. Dr. Han walked in, clipboard in hand, smile tight. His tone was different, less chatty, more surgical. He said things like results and biopsy and abnormal growth. Then he said it. It's cancer. He said it gently, like he didn't want to bruise the word, but it still hit like a brick to the chest. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just blinked and stared at his tie. It had little blue fish on it. I thought, why would anyone wear a fish tie to deliver death sentences? He kept talking. He explained treatment options, staging, prognosis, but I only heard the echoes of those 3 words. It's cancer. When I left the office, my hands were full of pamphlets. I didn't remember grabbing them. I didn't remember saying goodbye. I didn't remember walking out. But suddenly I was outside and the air felt too bright. The sun was still shining like it hadn't gotten the memo. I got into my car and sat there, just sat. My hands on the steering wheel, not moving. My eyes on the dashboard, not blinking. My heart pounding like it knew something my brain couldn't catch up to. In the parking lot, a man was yelling on his phone. "You always do this, Amanda," he shouted. I almost laughed. I wanted to roll down my window and yell, "Hey man, I just found out I might die. Maybe give Amanda a break today." But I didn't. I just turned the key. The engine started. My soul didn't. As I drove away, I looked in the rearview mirror and saw my face, same as it always was. And that somehow was the most disturbing part, because nothing looked different, but everything was. The hospital doors closed behind me with that soft pneumatic hiss, the kind that always sounded too final. Like the sliding doors knew something I didn't? Or maybe they did. Maybe they had seen hundreds of versions of me, the person who walks in with a head full of distractions and walks out with a diagnosis in their gut like a lit candle, flickering and dangerous. I stepped onto the sidewalk and just stood there. I wasn't crying, I wasn't shaking, I wasn't anything. It felt like my body had switched to autopilot, like I was watching myself from above. My legs moved without permission. I walked like someone had assigned me the task of leaving the building, and I was simply following orders. There was traffic. There were people. A dog barked. Somewhere a child laughed. And somehow that laugh hurt more than anything. I remember passing by a couple arguing about where to eat. One wanted sushi. The other said sushi was too cold and too raw and too weird. I wanted to scream cold and raw is the whole world right now, lady. But I didn't scream. I didn't speak. I just kept walking. The sky was blue, too blue, a disrespectfully cheerful kind of blue. Do you know how surreal it feels when your world implodes and everyone else is just fine? It's like getting punched in the stomach in the middle of a yoga class. Everyone around you is breathing deeply, finding their center, and you're just trying not to pass out. That's what grief is. I think not loud sobbing and emotional explosions, but the quiet confusion of wondering why no one else seems to notice that your reality has shattered. I got into my car, buckled my seatbelt. I didn't turn on the radio. I didn't want music. I didn't want silence either. I just wanted a version of me from 3 hours ago, someone who still believed this was just a regular Tuesday. Driving home was a blur. I took the same route I always did. Past the same gas station, the same sandwich shop, the same billboard that said, "Smile, you're alive," and I wanted to flip it off. But again, autopilot. Somewhere around the third red light, I started thinking about my apartment, my bed, my shower, my things. I wondered if they'd look different now. Would my pillow smell like fear? Would my mirror reflect someone I didn't recognize anymore? I parked, walked up the stairs, unlocked the door. My home greeted me like nothing had happened. The dishes still sat in the sink, judging me gently. My slippers were still by the door. The plants on my windowsill looked thirsty. And I felt like a ghost inside someone else's life. I collapsed onto the couch and stared at the ceiling. Just stared. I started counting the tiny cracks in the paint. 1, 2, 3, 4. My brain needed something to do. Anything. And then I made the mistake. I picked up my phone. You know what I searched? You probably did it too. I typed the word into Google like it was a normal question survival rate for my cancer. Enter, click, scroll, scroll, scroll. Statistical tables, medical journals, personal blogs from people named Hopeful Tommy Nafor. I read one comment thread where someone wrote, "My aunt beat this, you can too." Then the next comment said, "My dad died in 6 months." I closed the browser. It's a weird masochistic impulse to look at numbers and think they'll tell you how long you have left. As if the internet holds the stopwatch on your life. As if some stranger's timeline could predict mine. But I couldn't help it. That's what panic does. It makes you crave certainty even when certainty would break your heart. I sat there in the glow of my phone screen feeling like I had accidentally Googled my obituary. Eventually, I put the phone down. I stared at my hands. I flexed my fingers. Still mine. Still alive. And then I laughed. I don't know why. Maybe it was the absurdity. Maybe it was the silence. Maybe it was the fact that just yesterday I was worried about laundry, and now I was planning my future like it had a footnote. But the laugh turned into a hiccup. Then the hiccup became a sob. And then I was curled up on my couch crying like a faucet had turned on behind my eyes. It wasn't dramatic. No cinematic music. No Oscar-worthy tears. Just quiet, exhausted crying. Like something deep inside me had been punctured and all I could do was leak. Later, I stood in the kitchen and made tea. Because what else do you do after finding out your body is trying to kill you? You boil water. You pour it into a cup. You hold something warm because everything else feels cold. The tea tasted normal, too normal. I sipped it while watching the steam rise and wondered how many more cups of tea I'd get. 10, 100, 1,000. I didn't want to count. I just wanted to feel something that didn't hurt. The next day, I almost convinced myself it wasn't real. I woke up, kind of. I didn't so much wake up as I regained consciousness on top of my crumpled bedspread, fully clothed from the day before. My shoes were still on. My face had the crusty evidence of dried tears. I looked like I'd been hit by an emotional truck and dragged through a sea of confusion. I sat up, slowly blinking at the sunlight. It looked exactly the same as yesterday, and that pissed me off. Because if I was different now, if my whole world had been flipped inside out, why didn't the sun get the memo? Why were birds still chirping? Why did my toothpaste still taste minty and my sink still leak from the left side? I walked into the bathroom, leaned on the counter, and stared at myself in the mirror. Same face, same features, same me. Only now I knew something. There was something inside me that didn't belong. Something growing. Something trying to win. I whispered it out loud for the first time, "It's cancer." And I watched my own lips move like I was rehearsing for a play I never auditioned for. It didn't sound real. It didn't feel real. But there it was, echoing through the tile walls like a secret that refused to stay quiet. The next thing I did was both logical and completely unhinged. I got dressed, brushed my hair, and called my mom. Because that's what you do, right? You tell your mother. Only I didn't, not really. When she picked up, her voice was so bright it hurt. Good morning, sweetie. How'd your appointment go yesterday? I smiled through the phone. Oh, it was fine. You know, the usual. Lie number one. And it burned going down. She asked if I wanted to come over for lunch. I told her I had a busy day. Another lie. I had absolutely no plans. Unless you count sit in silence and stare at walls as a plan. We chatted for a few more minutes. She told me about a sale on tomatoes. Tomatoes. Meanwhile, my cells were busy mutating into something murderous. I hung up and stared at the floor. I'd never felt so far from her. And I hated it. The truth is, I didn't lie to protect her. I lied to protect me from hearing the fear in her voice, from seeing it solidify the diagnosis in real time, because once your mom knows, it's official. Once the people who raised you start looking at you like you're glass, it's over. So I kept it to myself, at least for now. I decided to go for a walk, not for health, not for clarity, just to move. The air felt sharp, like it could cut through the fog in my head. Every step felt exaggerated, like I was a person playing a person trying to remember how walking worked. And then I passed a cafe, a tiny, dusty, unremarkable cafe that I'd probably walked by 100 times. But this time it called to me. I went inside, sat by the window, and ordered a croissant. Why? I don't know. Because life felt heavy and flaky pastry felt light. The server smiled at me. I smiled back. And in that moment, I wondered, would she smile at me like that if she knew? It's a weird invisible secret carrying a diagnosis like a bomb under your coat. Everyone's walking around you casually while you're internally screaming, "Don't come too close, I might explode." As I sat there nibbling at the croissant, I pulled out my phone again because I hadn't learned my lesson. I Googled things to say when you have cancer. And let me tell you, the results were unhelpful at best, ridiculous at worst. One blog said, "Tell people with confidence, your attitude is everything." Another one said, "Use humor to diffuse the tension." Sure, let me walk up to my friends and say, "Hey guys, cancer, but don't worry, it's the good kind." What even is the good kind? Is there a version where you win a prize? I closed the browser again. This time I didn't cry. I just stared out the window watching people walk by with shopping bags, strollers, gym clothes, briefcases, all of them so busy being normal. So blissfully unaware of the ticking time bomb I had just learned to live with. And that's when I realized I had entered a different world. The old me had existed in a realm of casual decisions: what to eat, what to wear, what to binge watch on a lazy Sunday. But this version of me, this new one, I had to make decisions like, who should I tell? When should I start treatment? How much time do I have? And somewhere beneath the panic, beneath the fog, beneath the dry croissant and the tomato sale, I felt a small flicker of rebellion. I wasn't going to let this thing win. Not yet. Not today. I thought leaving the hospital would be the hardest part. Turns out it was leaving myself that hurt more. Because once you hear the word cancer, you don't just walk out with a folder and a confused heartbeat, you walk out as someone else entirely. But the world doesn't know that. It treats you like the version of you from an hour ago, like you're still running on the same software. Only you're not. You're glitching in places no one can see. That day, after the croissant and the awkward lie to my mom, I decided to take the long way home. I didn't want to go back to my apartment. My couch knew too much. My walls had seen me cry. I wasn't ready to return to the scene of the emotional crime. So I wandered, not metaphorically, like actually wandered. I walked around the city like a tourist in my own life. I passed stores I'd never entered, watched strangers from a distance, and let the world buzz around me like background noise. And then, for some reason I still can't explain, I stopped in front of a bookstore. It wasn't flashy. No neon signs. Just an old wood door with a bell that jingled when I pushed it open. Inside smelled like paper and dust and forgotten ambition. I wandered to the health section as if the answer to what I was becoming could be printed in a paperback. I saw titles like Cancer Warrior and Beating the Odds. One even had a smiling woman on the cover holding a green smoothie. Her skin glowed. Mine itched. I didn't pick up any of them. Instead, I sat on a little bench tucked into a corner and just existed. I don't know how long I sat there. 10 minutes. An hour time stopped mattering. But eventually my phone buzzed. It was my best friend, Hannah. She texted, "How'd the appointment go? All good." I stared at the screen like it had insulted my ancestors. All good. How do you even begin to answer that? I typed, deleted, retyped. Eventually, I just texted back, "Can I call you later?" She sent a thumbs up emoji. Casual, simple, oblivious. And I hated it. Not because she didn't care, but because I knew that in a few hours, I'd be the one taking that innocence away from her. I put the phone down and leaned back against the shelves. Somewhere a child laughed. Again with the laughing children. That's when the weird thought hit me, something I'd once read in a bizarre history book. Ancient Egyptians used crocodile dung as sunscreen. I know, random. But it stuck with me because it was absurd. People 4,000 years ago smeared poop on their skin to avoid sunburn. And now here I was with all of modern medicine, still terrified that nothing could save me from something already growing inside me. Historians still argue whether that was actual sunscreen or just religious ritual, but in that moment, I envied their conviction, the belief that some odd little practice might ward off death. Where's my crocodile dung? By the time I finally left the bookstore, the sun was dipping. Golden hour, the Instagram friendly kind that makes everything look a little too beautiful for what you're feeling. I walked past a window filled with wedding dresses and realized I hadn't thought about the future all day. Not my job, not my plans, not love, not even survival. Just existence. Because when you're diagnosed with cancer, your world shrinks to days, minutes, seconds. You stop dreaming and start surviving. You stop wondering what's next and start asking what now. Back at home, I sat on my bed, not on the edge, right in the middle, cross-legged like a kid about to play a game. Only the game this time was pretend your life is normal for just 5 minutes. And then I did something else strange. I opened my laptop and started a new document. I typed 3 words at the top, "Dear Hannah." I didn't know if I'd send it. I didn't even know what I wanted to say. But my fingers moved like they were being pulled by gravity. And what came out surprised me. I didn't write about fear. I didn't write about pain. I wrote about the sandwich shop we used to go to in high school. About that time we laughed so hard we both choked on lemonade. About how her laugh always made me feel like I'd be okay. It wasn't a letter about dying. It was a letter about remembering. And for the first time since the diagnosis, I felt human, not a patient, not a statistic, just someone who had a memory worth putting into words. When I finally closed the laptop, I exhaled like I'd been holding my breath since yesterday, because maybe I wasn't entirely gone yet. Not as long as I still had something to say. I don't know what I was expecting when I opened my laptop the next morning. Maybe a miracle, maybe clarity, maybe just something. But all I got was the same blank document staring back at me, cursor blinking like a metronome for anxiety. I had written "Dear Hannah" the night before, and then spilled out a few pages of memory honesty and barely restrained fear. Now I was staring at it again, wondering if I had the guts to actually send it. Spoiler, I didn't, not yet. So instead, I did the next worst thing possible. I opened Google again. I know. But when your body becomes a mystery you didn't sign up to solve, the internet becomes both your therapist and your executioner. I typed in, "How long do people live with specific cancer type?" Enter, click, regret. This wasn't curiosity anymore. This was self-sabotage wrapped in clinical language and sponsored ads for herbal remedies. I read words like median survival rate, recurrence stage progression, and palliative care timeline. Each phrase was like getting pinched from the inside. And then deep in a forum from 2008, I found a thread titled, "If you could go back to diagnosis day, what would you do differently?" I clicked, because of course I did. There were dozens of answers, some hopeful, some bitter, some haunting. One said, "I would have taken a video of myself before treatment changed my face, before fear took over my voice, just to remember who I was." Another one said, "I'd tell fewer people, everyone treats you like you're already gone." And then one that just said, "I'd eat more cake." That one made me laugh, then cry, then laugh again. And then I ordered cake, because screw it. Around noon, I realized I had to go back to the hospital tomorrow, my first official oncology consult. Just thinking about it made my spine go cold. I didn't even know what to wear to something like that. Did you dress for comfort confidence battle? I opened my closet and stared at my clothes like they were costumes for roles I no longer played. There were date night outfits, office outfits, gym clothes I hadn't worn since my membership expired 3 New Years ago. Nothing screamed I'm ready to face my mortality with grace and sarcasm. So I closed the closet and opened a bag of chips instead. That's when I decided to call Hannah. I didn't think it through, I just did it. She picked up on the third ring. "Hey you, what's up?" Her voice was warm, easy, still living in the version of reality I'd been dragged out of. I swallowed hard, and then I said it. I have cancer. I thought the words would come out dramatic, movie scene level emotional, but they came out flat, quiet, almost embarrassed. There was a pause, a real one, the kind where you can hear someone thinking. Then she exhaled and said, "Okay, I'm here." I didn't cry. Not then. Not even after she said, "Do you want me to come over?" And I said, "No, not yet." I just sat there, phone against my cheek, listening to her breathe, knowing that things had changed, not because I had cancer, but because now someone else knew. That evening, I tried to act normal. I watered the plants. I watched 3 episodes of some reality show I couldn't follow. I even answered a work email like nothing had happened. But the truth is, I was cracking. By the time I climbed into bed, my brain felt like static. Everything buzzed, the air, the sheets, my skin. I couldn't relax. Couldn't stop imagining my cells betraying me like tiny invisible traitors. So I did what any rational adult would do. I typed, "How do you tell your parents you have cancer?" into YouTube. There were a lot of tearful vlogs, a few overly rehearsed monologues, and then just one that stuck with me. A woman mid-30s sitting on the floor of her laundry room. She looked tired, no makeup, fuzzy bathrobe, eyes swollen from crying. And she just said, "There's no right way to say it. Just tell them and let them love you." That hit me. I closed the laptop, turned off the light, stared at the ceiling. And for the first time since diagnosis day, I didn't think about death. I thought about love, about how much harder it was to let people care for you than to push them away. I realized something too, something odd and vaguely historical. In 14th century Europe during the Black Plague, there were people called plague confessors. These were regular folks, not priests who'd sit with the dying when no one else would, just to keep them company. No advice, no sermons, just presence. Historians still argue whether they made any measurable difference in survival, but I think that misses the point. They didn't show up to save lives, they showed up so people didn't have to die alone. That night, I texted Hannah again. "Tomorrow's my first oncology consult." She replied instantly, "Want me to come?" I stared at her message for a long time. And then I wrote, "Yeah, I think I do." Because maybe this wasn't something I was meant to face alone. I didn't sleep much. Not because of nightmares or pain, but because my brain refused to shut up. It kept playing scenes from imaginary futures I hadn't signed off on, like a terrible movie marathon where every possible version of my life ended with a hospital bed and the sound of a heart monitor flatlining. At 3:13 a.m., I gave up trying. I got out of bed, made toast because apparently toast is my middle of the night coping mechanism, and sat on the floor with my back against the kitchen cabinets, chewing in the dark. It wasn't even good toast. I forgot to butter it. But it gave my hands something to do, and right now that was enough. By 7 year, I had already showered twice, changed clothes 4 times, and Googled should I eat before chemotherapy, even though I wasn't starting chemo yet. I was just trying to stay 3 steps ahead of panic. Hannah texted, "I'm outside. No rush." No rush. I love how people say that when the only thing I feel is the ticking clock in my chest. I grabbed my bag, looked in the mirror one last time, and gave myself a quick nod, like I was an actor about to go on stage. "You've got this," I told myself. "You're not dying today." Probably. She was waiting in her car with coffee. She had no idea what kind of coffee I liked. I had no idea what kind of person I was anymore. So we both just pretended it was the right kind. We didn't say much on the drive. The silence wasn't awkward, just tentative, like the air itself was holding its breath. The hospital was 30 minutes away, but time played its usual tricks. The road felt endless and way too short all at once. When we arrived, I checked in, filled out forms with my shaking hand, and tried not to read the cancer center brochures on the table. They all had the same stock photo people smiling in headscarves, holding hands walking through fields. No one ever looked terrified. The nurse called my name. I stood up like I was walking toward judgment. And in some ways, I was. Hannah squeezed my hand as I passed her and whispered, "You're not alone." Those 3 words anchored me more than any medical chart ever could. Inside the room was cold and bright. I sat on the paper-covered table and looked around, diplomas on the wall, a poster of the lymphatic system, a hand sanitizer bottle with a broken pump. I waited and waited. And then the oncologist walked in. Dr. Morrison. He looked young. Too young. His hair was neat, but his eyes had that weight, like he'd carried too many bad news conversations across too many years. He smiled gently and sat down. We talked. He explained what would happen next. Scans, blood work, genetic testing, treatment options, terms like aggressive and localized and treatment window. I asked questions I thought were smart. He answered with patience and caution, like every word was carrying a fragile glass of water. Don't spill. Don't scare. And then, casually, like he was reading a weather forecast, he said, "You should probably think about freezing your eggs." I blinked. That's when it hit me. Not just the cancer, not just the fear, but the collateral damage. The part of my life I hadn't even lived yet, children, family, futures I hadn't imagined in years, suddenly felt like they were slipping through a trap door. He kept talking. I kept nodding, but my brain had exited the room. Eventually, it was over. The consult, at least. He handed me more papers, more appointments, a list of things to do. Like I had homework for a class I never asked to be in. I walked out feeling heavier. Like my cells had weight now, like everything was being measured, even my breath. Hannah was waiting in the lobby. She stood up when she saw me. No words, just a look. And then, as we stepped outside into the too bright sun, she asked, "How do you feel?" I thought for a moment. And then I said, like I'm walking around with a secret bomb in my body, and it's ticking. She nodded. I wasn't being dramatic, I was being honest. Because that's what cancer is, right? Not just cells dividing, but time collapsing. I think about something weird sometimes, something historical again. The Roman Empire had a tradition where a general celebrating victory would be paraded through the city in a chariot. Behind him, a servant would whisper, "Memento mori." Remember you are mortal. I used to think that was morbid. Now I think it's practical. Life is short. We know that. But cancer doesn't let you forget it. It presses the reminder against your ribs every time you breathe. Later that night, back in my apartment, I tried to rest. But my body was buzzing from information overload and quiet panic. So I did the only thing I knew how to do. I wrote. This time it wasn't a letter to anyone else. It was to myself. I started with, "You're scared. That's okay, but don't forget you're still here." Because even in the middle of the storm, that matters. I was still here, still standing, still writing. I cracked a joke the next morning, a bad one. I looked in the mirror, pointed at myself with mock enthusiasm, and said, "Congratulations, you've won an all-expense-paid trip to chemotherapy land population U." Then I laughed. And then I sat on the edge of the bathtub and cried into a towel. That pretty much sums up the rest of the week. I started leaning into dark humor like it was a life raft. Every time the panic bubbled up, I'd slap a sarcastic bow on it and pretend I was fine. Because if I could make cancer funny, maybe it wouldn't feel so big. Or maybe I just needed to trick myself into believing I still had control, even if it was just over the punchlines. I'd say things like, "Well, at least I'll save on shampoo, or maybe I'll finally lose those last 10 pounds the terminal way." No one really laughed, not the nurse, not the barista, but I kept doing it anyway. Because when the world doesn't know how to respond to your fear, you have to be the one to break the silence, even if it's with a joke that tastes bitter on the way out. By Friday, I realized I'd been avoiding everyone. Hannah, my mom, coworkers, even my neighbor who usually corners me in the hallway to talk about her cats. I was retreating, shrinking into myself like a houseplant without sun. Not because I didn't want company, but because I didn't know how to exist around people anymore. They all wanted me to be okay, and I was the farthest thing from it. So when my phone rang and I saw it was my cousin Alex, the only person in my life more emotionally direct than a wrecking ball, I almost let it go to voicemail. But I answered. Yo, he said in that voice that somehow always sounded like it had just woken up and also bench pressed a car. "How's your new tumor roommate?" I snorted, aggressively quiet, just like me. There was a pause. Then he said, "You know I love you, right? Even if you're about to look like Voldemort's long-lost cousin." I laughed for real then. It was ugly and loud and startled my cat. Alex always had a way of ripping the bandage off in the least graceful way possible, but damn if it didn't help. He didn't say, "You'll beat this" or "Stay strong" or any of those sympathy cliches. He just showed up, unapologetically real. I think that's when I started to understand something vital. People can't fix you, but they can sit with you in the mess. Later that night, I did another round of late-night doom scrolling because of course I did. But this time I wasn't looking for statistics. I was looking for people like me. Stories, truth, something human. And in my clicking, I stumbled across a Reddit thread titled, "What's the dumbest thing someone said to you after your diagnosis?" I braced myself, and wow, it delivered. "Have you tried essential oils?" I read that thinking positive thoughts can shrink tumors. My dog had cancer and he was fine. My personal favorite was, "You don't look like you have cancer." That one got me. Because what exactly does cancer look like? Hollow eyes, a headscarf, a black and white photo with soft piano music in the background. Because if so, I was failing miserably. I still looked like me. My skin was still clear, my hair still thick, my posture still confident, which only made it harder. Because everyone assumed I was fine. And I hated how invisible the illness was. It's like I was living in the before photo of a tragedy no one else could see. And then, somewhere in the scrolling madness, I came across this sentence that stopped me cold. Laughing at death doesn't make you fearless. No, it just means you've decided not to let fear be the only voice in the room. I sat with that for a long time. Because, yeah, I wasn't fearless. I was scared out of my damn mind. But I was trying to give myself something to hold on to besides dread. Humor wasn't a mask, it was a rope. a rope I could grab onto when everything else was slipping. By the time I climbed into bed, I felt a tiny bit lighter, not healed, not brave, just a little more me. Before I drifted off, I remembered a weird historical tidbit. In 18th century France, during public executions, people would often crack jokes as they were being led to the guillotine. Jokes at death's door. Historians still argue whether it was courage or hysteria. Maybe it was both. Maybe that's where I live now, somewhere between terror and punchlines, balancing on a wire made of hope and sarcasm. And maybe that was enough. For now, it took me 3 full days to tell my mom the truth. 3 days of pretending everything was fine. 3 days of changing the subject. 3 days of dodging FaceTime calls and sending "I'll call you later" texts I had no intention of honoring. She knew something was off, of course she did. Moms are like lie detectors, wrapped in concern and wrapped again in passive-aggressive casserole recipes. But I kept avoiding it because saying it out loud to her would make it realer than I was ready for. Still, I couldn't keep the wall up forever. So I called her on a Sunday afternoon, the kind of lazy golden day where nothing should ever go wrong. And I asked if she had time to talk, which in mom language instantly translates to, "Oh no, something's terribly wrong." She invited me over. I almost bailed halfway there, but I made it to her front porch. My hands were sweating, and I remember thinking, why does telling the truth feel like standing on the edge of a cliff? She opened the door with that same warm look she's had since I was 5 and scraped my knee. That look that says, I can fix this. I can fix anything. But she couldn't fix this. We sat on the couch and she offered me tea because, of course. And I couldn't stall any longer. I told her, I said, "Mom, I have cancer." There was a pause so long it felt like the earth paused rotation just for us. Her face didn't crumble. She didn't burst into tears or scream. Instead, her eyes just shifted, like she was trying to scan me for visible proof of what I'd just said. Like maybe if she looked hard enough, she'd find a lie to cling to. But there wasn't one. She blinked once, twice. And then she said, "What kind?" Not why, not how, just what kind. And that's when I realized she wasn't shocked. She was bracing. Bracing for war, bracing to go into battle with me whether I wanted her there or not. I told her what I knew, the type, the stage, the plan, what little of it existed. And she nodded the whole way through her fingers, gripping her mug like it was the only thing holding her steady. Then she said, "We'll get through this, not you, we." That word meant everything. I didn't expect her to be strong. I expected her to fall apart. But instead, she met me with calm, a deep, maternal steel that had always existed beneath her softness. It reminded me of something I'd once read about World War II, mothers in London, how they'd hold their babies underground while bombs fell above, humming lullabies like the world wasn't ending. Historians still argue whether those lullabies were for the children or the mothers themselves. I think I finally understand the answer. That night she made dinner. I wasn't hungry, but I ate anyway. Not because I needed food, but because she needed to feed me. She told me stories from when I was little. Reminded me that I once survived choking on a Lego. That I got lost in a department store for an hour and didn't cry. That I faced down a neighborhood dog that barked at everyone else but rolled over for me. "You've always been a fighter," she said. It sounded like something someone says to be reassuring, but it stuck with me because I didn't feel like a fighter. I felt like a cracked phone screen still functioning, but one drop away from total failure. Still, I nodded. "Thanks, Mom." She drove me home. She didn't ask if she should. She just grabbed her keys and said, "Come on, I need to know you got there safe." Like she could keep me safe from this. And even though I was 30-something years old, I let her. In the car, we didn't talk much. The sky was turning dark, streetlights blinking on one by one, like the world was being reminded it still had a job to do. At one red light, she reached over and held my hand. She didn't say anything, just held it. And that somehow was the part that broke me. I turned my head, looked out the window, and let the tears roll without a word. Because grief isn't always loud. Sometimes it's a silent squeeze of a hand in the middle of a red light. When she dropped me off, she didn't linger. She just kissed my forehead and said, "Call me tomorrow." And I did, because now she knew, and I didn't have to carry it alone anymore. That night, lying in bed, I thought about all the people who don't tell anyone, who hold it all in, who swallow their terror and smile politely because they're afraid of becoming a burden. And I felt them with me in the quiet, because we're all just trying to hold ourselves together, one small confession at a time. Hospitals have a specific smell. It's not exactly bad, it's just unnatural, sterile. Somewhere between industrial cleaner and recycled air with a hint of something metallic like anxiety distilled into a scent. I caught a whiff of it the moment I stepped out of the elevator on the 4th floor. This was at my first official oncology appointment. Not the general consultation, not the preliminary blood draw. This was the real thing. The one where we map out the battle plan, as Dr. Morrison had put it. It sounded more like we were planning a military strike than saving my life, which I guess isn't far off. The waiting area was unusually quiet. A TV played muted footage of a cooking show, and someone 2 chairs over was scrolling their phone with headphones and nodding to a beat I couldn't hear. A couple sat near the window holding hands, eyes locked forward. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. It hit me then this place wasn't full of patients. It was full of people living double lives. One as themselves and the other as a person navigating the system of scans, tubes, and needles. When they called my name, I stood up like I was stepping onto a stage. I was taken to a small room, the kind with a desk in the corner, 2 chairs, and a slightly too high examination table with that familiar crinkly paper on top. I sat, stared at the anatomical posters on the wall, and tried not to overthink the fact that one of them was labeled metastasis. Dr. Morrison came in with a nurse named Lacey. She had a bright pink scrunchie in her hair and eyes that looked like they'd seen too much and somehow still stayed kind. That combination always guts me. We got right into it. He opened a folder and the words started flowing. Test results, scan, impressions, markers, treatment phases. It was like medical poetry, only way less romantic. I nodded along, trying to absorb it all, but my brain was doing that thing where it started buffering halfway through. Chemo would start in 2 weeks. 6 rounds, one every 3 weeks. Possible side effects: nausea, fatigue, hair loss, loss of appetite, neuropathy, risk of infection. Any questions, he asked. I blinked. Will I still be able to taste pizza? He laughed, not because it was funny, but because I think he needed a break in the rhythm of it all. You might. You might not. Sometimes taste changes. It's temporary for most people. Temporary. A word that had suddenly started carrying so much weight. He gave me a stack of handouts printed in color, neatly stapled with bolded section headers like what to expect during chemo and managing side effects at home. I stared at them, then shoved them into my bag like if I didn't look at them, none of this was happening. Then he paused. There's something else we need to talk about. My stomach did a small somersault. More good news. He smiled gently. You're young, so we need to consider fertility preservation before we begin treatment. Ah, that. I nodded slowly. We'd brushed past it last time, but now it was front and center. Can chemo? There's a significant risk to your reproductive system. Freezing your eggs is an option if that's something you think you might want down the line. Down the line. I didn't even know if I'd be down the line. But still, there it was. A quiet little fork in the road between surviving now and dreaming later. We discussed referrals, timelines, hormone injections, retrieval procedures. It was like signing up for a marathon while standing at the base of a volcano. After he left, Nurse Lacey stayed with me for a minute. She sat beside me, not across from me, not behind a desk, but right there beside me and said, It's a lot, I know. I nodded. My throat felt like gravel. You don't have to decide everything today, she said. You just have to get to tomorrow. That sentence wrapped around me like a warm blanket. After the appointment, I sat in my car for 10 minutes, keys in the ignition engine off. The sun was out, the sky was aggressively blue, and I had a prescription for anti-nausea meds in my lap, like a welcome gift to club chemotherapy. My phone buzzed Hannah again. How'd it go? I didn't respond right away. I looked up at the hospital building, thought about the people inside, the warriors, the fighters, the ones still pretending to be brave even when they weren't. And then I texted back, official now, the battle plan's in place. She replied with a gif of a cat wearing armor and holding a sword. It made me laugh hard enough to fog up my windshield. Driving home, I passed a park where 2 kids were chasing a dog. I slowed down to watch. They laughed and screamed, and the dog barked like the world was nothing but joy and peanut butter treats. For a moment, I forgot I was sick. Just for a breath. Just long enough to remember I'm still human. I thought about a strange fact I once read during the Cold War. The US government created a plan to keep artists alive in the event of nuclear war. Painters, poets, musicians, they believed creativity was essential to rebuilding morale. Historians still argue whether art could actually rebuild a broken world. But as I drove home, a cat gif and the sound of children laughing trailing behind me, I started to believe that maybe, just maybe, joy could rebuild me. I stood in front of the mirror holding a pair of scissors. It wasn't dramatic. I didn't blast a sad song or light a candle or set up a time-lapse video like those brave people on YouTube do. I just stood there in my bathroom, surrounded by the faint scent of shampoo and anxiety, trying to decide if I wanted to be the one in control of the next thing cancer would take from me. My hair. It was thick, long, and one of the few things I'd always liked about myself. I didn't have to do much to it, it just kind of behaved. Like it knew I had enough going on already. But now it was on borrowed time. Dr. Morrison had told me it would likely fall out 2 to 3 weeks into chemo. Some people shed slowly strand by strand. Others wake up with pillowcases that look like haunted forests. I didn't want to wait for that. So there I was, scissors in hand, staring down a choice that felt more personal than medical. Because hair isn't just hair, it's identity, memory, warmth, vanity, armor. I took a breath and started small, just one strand snipped near the bottom. The sound it made was shockingly loud in my ears. Sharp, final, and then I cried. Not because I was sad, not exactly, but because cutting it felt like admitting something I hadn't fully said out loud. This is real. Still, I didn't cut the whole thing off. Not yet. I wasn't ready for full G.I. Jane. Instead, I made a hair appointment for the next day. A real one. With a real stylist. Because if I was going to lose it, I wanted it to go out with dignity, not over my bathroom sink in a fit of panic. The next morning, I walked into a salon I'd never been to before. My usual stylist was booked out, and I didn't feel like explaining. This place was quiet, sunlit, with potted plants and jazz playing softly through the speakers. A woman named Lena greeted me with a smile that didn't ask questions. "I want to cut it short," I said, running my fingers through my hair. She raised an eyebrow, like short. I nodded, like preemptively short. She didn't push, just nodded back. "Let's do it." We didn't talk much while she worked. I watched tufts of hair fall to the ground like leaves in slow motion. Every snip was a countdown, a signal flare to my old self that things were about to change. When she spun the chair around and handed me a mirror, I barely recognized myself. It was a cute cut, objectively fashionably short, a little edgy even. But behind the style, I saw a version of me that looked a little braver, a little more raw. Someone I wasn't sure I liked yet, but definitely respected. "You look strong," Lena said. And I smiled because even if I didn't feel it, it was nice to hear someone say it out loud. Later that night, I sent a photo to Hannah. Her reply, hot badass, ready for battle. I almost believed it. Then my mom called. I hadn't told her about the haircut. I figured she'd see it eventually. But moms have a sixth sense for these things. "I want to see you," she said. So I went over. When I walked in, she blinked once, then smiled. "You look like your Aunt Lily. Remember her short hair?" I nodded. My aunt had battled breast cancer when I was a kid. I remembered her in wide headbands and silk scarves. I also remembered thinking she looked like a warrior. Now here I was apparently becoming one too. We had tea because that's what we always do now. Tea, quiet, and fewer lies. She asked if I was scared. I told her the truth, not all the time. And that was enough. Later, I stood in her bathroom looking at my reflection again. This time, I noticed something different. My eyes. They looked older. Not in a tired way, but in a wiser way. Like they had already seen the hard part and were waiting to see what I'd do with it. That night, I curled up on the couch with a blanket and started drafting another letter. Not to anyone specific, just to future me. A reminder that whatever happens, this version of me showed up. I wrote, "You did something hard today, something brave. And even if you don't remember this moment in a year, you need to know you were strong when it mattered." Before bed, I scrolled through photos on my phone, the old me with long hair at weddings, vacations, birthdays. I didn't feel sad, just grateful. Grateful I got to be her once. Grateful I still get to be me. Somewhere in that hazy place between wake and sleep, I remembered a weird fact I'd once read. In the Middle Ages, knights would cut their hair short before battle. Not because it helped them fight better, but because they didn't want anything extra weighing them down in a duel. Historians still argue whether it was practical or symbolic. But as I lay in the dark scalp still tingling from the shears, I thought, maybe both. I couldn't sleep. It wasn't fear this time, not the kind that punches you in the chest. It was something quieter, heavier. Like a fog settling in the corners of my bedroom and wrapping itself around my ribs. I watched the clock crawl from 2:17 a.m. to 2:52 a.m. The ceiling fan spun like it had somewhere to be, and my sheets were twisted around my legs like they'd tried to restrain me during some unseen battle in my dreams. So I got up, again. I wandered into the kitchen, opened the fridge, and stared at its contents like they held the answers. Spoiler, they didn't. Half a tub of hummus, 2 eggs, oat milk, and a single sad apple. Not exactly a feast for the weary soul. I took the apple bit into it and winced. Too soft. Everything was too something lately, too quiet, too loud, too much, not enough. I sat on the floor, back against the fridge, and tried to breathe deeply like the meditation app had taught me. Inhale 4 seconds, hold 4, exhale 6. Repeat. Instead, I just ended up choking on a piece of apple skin. Classic. I remembered something someone said in a podcast I half listened to a few days ago, something about insomnia being the brain's way of saying, I don't feel safe. Well, brain message received. The thing is, night changes everything. In the day, I could fake it. I could distract myself with errands and emails and text messages and organizing the spice cabinet alphabetically. Don't judge me. But at night, there's nowhere to hide. The dark is too honest, too quiet. It strips you down to the bones of your fear and makes you look it in the face. At 3:08 a.m., I pulled on a hoodie and walked outside. The city was sleeping mostly. The streets were lit by sleepy orange lamps, and everything sounded muffled like the whole world was tucked under a thick blanket. I walked aimlessly, no destination, just movement, just breathing. I passed a bakery with a glowing open at 6 sign and a newsstand where tomorrow's headlines were already tucked into place. And then without thinking, I walked to the little park near my old high school, the one with the broken water fountain and the crooked swing set. I sat on the swing and let the metal chains creak beneath my weight. And then I cried. Not dramatic sobs, just a slow leaking kind of sadness that felt almost peaceful. Because sometimes your body needs to mourn the version of you that used to believe life had no expiration date. I thought about the future I used to picture vague and messy and full of some days. Someday I'd write a book. Someday I'd travel more. Someday I'd figure it all out. But cancer doesn't care about someday. It demands you pay attention to right now. And right now was 3:32 a.m., and I was sitting on a swing in the dark, trying to remember what it felt like to be unafraid. That's when the memory hit me the summer I broke my arm as a kid. I was 10. I had climbed onto the garage roof with my cousin, don't ask why we were 10, and I jumped off trying to be cool. I wasn't. I landed badly. My arm cracked like a twig, but I didn't cry until after I saw my mom's face. That look of worry broke me faster than the fall did. Because pain is one thing, but being seen in pain, that's something else. I think that's why the nights are so hard. There's no one there to witness it, to validate that yes, this hurts, and yes, it's unfair, and no, you're not being dramatic. By the time I walked home, the sky was bleeding into dawn. The first streaks of light cut across the horizon like someone had unzipped the night. I made coffee, sat on the windowsill, watched the world stretch its limbs and pretend yesterday didn't happen. And for a minute, I felt like I was part of it. I opened my journal and wrote, "Survival is quieter than I expected. Less fire, more flicker. Less screaming, more whispering to yourself in the dark." Later that day, Hannah texted asking if I wanted to go out for lunch. I said no. She showed up anyway, holding tacos and a 6-pack of ginger ale like some kind of emotional support fairy. We sat on the floor of my living room eating carnitas and watching a dumb comedy special. And for a solid 20 minutes, I forgot everything. I forgot the schedule, the scans, the pills, the hair, the fear. Just two friends laughing at stupid jokes covered in salsa. At one point, I looked over at her and said I didn't sleep last night. I walked to the park and cried. She didn't gasp or rush to fix it. She just said, "Yeah, that makes sense." And that made all the difference. Before bed that night, I looked out the window again. The world was still spinning. The stars were still hanging up there like nothing had changed. But I had, and that was okay. Because sometimes surviving looks like this: a midnight swing set, a too soft apple, a friend who shows up even when you say no, and the whisper you tell yourself just before sleep, you're still here. Hospitals have sounds you never forget. Not the dramatic kind, not sirens or monitors flatlining, but the subtle, repetitive ones that sneak into your bones. The faint buzz of fluorescent lights, the wheeled carts squeaking along tiled floors, the gentle ding of an elevator arriving, the rustle of scrubs, the low murmur of someone talking about something they can't quite say out loud. That's what I noticed most during my pre-chemo blood work, how loud silence becomes when you're trying not to fall apart. I sat in the phlebotomy room, arm outstretched, a rubber strap tight around my bicep. The nurse, a woman named Janice with calming energy and glittery nail polish, asked me how I was feeling. I gave the universal answer, fine. She smiled. She didn't believe me. No one really does when you say fine, like it's a brick wall with lipstick. As she tapped my vein and inserted the needle, I stared at a poster on the wall that said, "Your blood tells your story." And I thought, what a cruel line. Because if my blood could talk, it would scream. She filled the vials one by one, purple cap, red cap, gold cap, like collecting souvenirs from a journey I never signed up for. Afterward, she handed me a juice box, grape. I sipped it like a sad child at a carnival no one invited me to. Then came the second part of my hospital adventure, the mandatory orientation session for new chemo patients. Sounds cheerful, doesn't it? Like we're joining a summer camp. I was led into a conference room with 8 other people, some older, some my age, all equally shell shocked. There were pamphlets on the table, a slideshow set up, bottled water in the corner, and a nurse educator who smiled like she'd practiced it in the mirror every day for 10 years. She went through everything: side effects, schedules, port placement, dietary recommendations, emergency numbers, how to manage mouth sores, how to track your white blood cell count, how to call if you get a fever at 2 a.m., how to tell your boss you might not be available for that team building retreat next month. It was all helpful, technically, but as she spoke, I found myself dissociating, floating above the room, watching us all sit in our little chairs like students who had been punished with a lifetime of homework. At one point, she asked if anyone had questions. An older man with a baseball cap asked if he'd be able to fish during treatment. I remember that so clearly, because everyone chuckled softly, not mockingly, but with recognition. Because that's the thing you cling to in this space between diagnosis and recovery, whatever's left of your normal life. After the session, we each received a tote bag filled with what they called comfort items: a blanket, a beanie peppermint lip balm, a journal, and a small stuffed bear. A bear. Because apparently we're all just kids who need something to hold while the medicine burns. I clutched the bag tightly as I rode the elevator back down. The woman next to me was silent. Her eyes closed, her lips moving just slightly like she was reciting a prayer or maybe just reminding herself to breathe. When I got home, I emptied the bag on my bed. The blanket was soft pale blue and smelled faintly of lavender. I ran my fingers over it for a few minutes before folding it back up and placing it carefully in the chair by my window. The bear, though, that I didn't know what to do with. It felt ridiculous. I was 30-something, not 6. I hadn't owned a stuffed animal in years, but something about its small, round eyes and stitched smile made me keep it. I placed it on my nightstand like a sentinel, a silent witness. That evening, I texted Hannah had hospital orientation today. Got a bear. She replied, name it Walter. He looks like a Walter. I looked at it. Walter. Sure, why not? Walter it was. Dinner that night was cereal. I wasn't hungry. My stomach had started to develop this constant low-grade unease like it was preemptively nervous. As I sat at the table, slowly chewing spoonfuls of oat flakes, I started thinking about all the little details that were now part of my life appointment. Times, medication reminders, stool softeners, yay, temperature logs, hydration trackers, food. I might never taste the same way again. But what stuck out most weirdly was the smell. The smell of hospital soap. It clung to my hands, my clothes, the paperwork, my hair. A subtle antiseptic signature that whispered, "You're sick," even when I tried to pretend otherwise. There's something about that smell. It's not just clean, it's clinical. Sterile, in a way that erases personality. It doesn't smell like home. It smells like someone pressed pause on your life. And the worst part, I knew it would become familiar. Soon I'd smell that soap and feel nothing at all. No discomfort, no resistance, just acceptance. That terrified me more than any diagnosis ever could. Before bed, I stood at my window and watched the cars drift by, their headlights casting brief shadows on my ceiling. People coming home from work, picking up groceries, living their ordinary lives. I used to be one of them. But now I was someone who measured time in blood draws and infusions. Someone who smelled like disinfectant. Someone who'd named a stuffed bear. And still, somehow, someone who was still here. I turned off the lights, crawled into bed, pulled the blue blanket over my shoulders, and whispered to the ceiling, "One day down, let's see what tomorrow smells like." There's a strange kind of freedom that comes when you realize you've lost control. Not the panicked, spiraling kind of freedom, more like the feeling of letting go of the steering wheel on a car. You're not even driving anymore. A quiet, almost absurd acceptance. Okay, you think I guess we'll just see where this thing goes. I hit that point during the first chemo infusion. It started early. I showed up to the oncology center just after sunrise wearing the softest hoodie I owned, carrying a bag packed like I was going on a sad weekend trip, headphones, hard candy, a paperback I wouldn't read, and Walter the Bear stuffed discreetly at the bottom like a lucky charm I was too embarrassed to admit I needed. The infusion room looked exactly how I didn't want it to look. Clean, spacious, fluorescent, recliners lined up like airplane seats, IV poles, standing at attention like skeletal sentinels. A nurse greeted me. Her name was Tasha, and she wore galaxy-patterned scrubs and pink glasses. She spoke gently the way you talk to someone who's standing at the edge of something steep. We went over the process again: side effects, what to expect, what to report. I nodded through it like a student who had already memorized the syllabus and still had no idea what the class was really going to be like. Then she inserted the IV. I watched the bag of medication, clear, unassuming, begin its slow descent through the tube and into my body. And that's when I thought, well, there it is. The poison and the cure in one drip. I didn't cry. I didn't flinch. I didn't even feel much at all physically, but something in me shifted, something internal and unspoken. Like a door had closed behind me, and I knew I wouldn't see the same version of myself on the other side. The first hour passed slowly. I listened to lo-fi beats in my headphones, scrolled through photos on my phone, watched an elderly woman 2 chairs down knit a scarf, like it was the most natural thing in the world. At some point, I got up to use the bathroom, dragging the IV pole with me like a reluctant dance partner. In the mirror, I caught a glimpse of myself and thought, you look fine, almost normal. But the tube taped to my arm said otherwise. When I returned to my chair, someone had left a cup of peppermint tea on the little table beside me. Tasha winked. For the nausea that hasn't started yet. I smiled. She was good at this. By the end of the session, I felt tired. Not exhausted, but emptied out. Like someone had reached inside and turned the dimmer switch down a few notches. Hannah picked me up. She didn't ask how it went. Just opened the car door, adjusted the seat warmer, and handed me a muffin. I didn't know what flavor you'd want, so I bought 5, she said. I took a bite. Blueberry. Tasted faintly of cardboard, but I chewed anyway. Back at home, I curled up on the couch with a blanket and stared at the ceiling. My body felt like it was full of shadows. Not pain, not yet, just a strange, sinking stillness. Like my insides were bracing for something the outside couldn't understand. And that's when the absurdity started to creep in. Because even in the middle of all this, the appointments, the vomiting I'd been warned about, the long list of don'ts and precautions, I started laughing, like actual laughing. I laughed because I realized I'd never been this hydrated in my entire life. I laughed because my anti-nausea pills came with a side effect of more nausea. I laughed because I had 5 muffins and no appetite. It wasn't denial, it was survival. Because when nothing feels solid, the ridiculousness of it all is the only thing that keeps you from screaming. I remembered a trivia fact I once read. In medieval times, they believed that laughter could physically expel disease from the body, that if you laughed hard enough, it might scare the sickness away. Historians still argue whether that belief had any real basis, or if it was just desperate hope. But in that moment, wrapped in a blanket, nibbling a tasteless muffin, and giggling at nothing in particular, I kind of got it. Laughter didn't make the illness go away, but it reminded me I was still alive. Later that evening, I showered and caught a glimpse of my arm in the mirror. The tape from the IV had left a pink mark. I touched it gently. It didn't hurt, but it felt like a stamp. A first page in a chapter I hadn't wanted to write. I stood there, water running down my back, and whispered to myself, this is the beginning. Not the end, not yet. Not while there were muffins left uneaten and sarcastic jokes still unwritten. That night, I pulled Walter onto the bed with me and turned out the lights. My body was tired, my thoughts were tired. But I'd made it through day 1, and that despite everything felt like a win. People think cancer makes you deep, profound, spiritual even. Like suddenly you're supposed to start speaking in metaphors and sitting silently under trees contemplating existence. But mostly it makes your conversations weird, like really weird. Ever since I started chemo, people, even strangers, started opening up to me like I was some kind of walking confession booth. It's like I'd unlocked a code that gave everyone around me permission to say the quiet things they'd been holding in for years. Take the lady at the pharmacy, for instance. I was there to pick up my 3rd set of anti-nausea pills, minding my own business, when the woman in line behind me leaned in and said, you know, when my husband had cancer, he used to eat dried pineapple to help with the metallic taste. Oh, I said, startled. Good to know. Then she added, also he cheated on me during chemo, with his nurse. Can you believe that? I blinked. He died anyway, she said. So, then she paid for her vitamins and left. I stood there clutching my little paper bag, unsure if I'd just been warned cursed or welcomed into a secret club. That sort of thing kept happening. An old coworker sent me a message on Facebook. We hadn't talked in years, but now she was suddenly telling me about her miscarriage in 2017. The guy who delivers groceries to my building saw my buzzed head and said, my dad didn't lose his hair, but he lost his teeth. Still beat it, though. My dentist, while scraping my molars, told me his cousin found God after her 2nd mastectomy. It was like I'd become a grief magnet, a pain lighthouse. People saw my suffering, assumed I'd understand theirs, and beamed their darkest stories straight at me without hesitation. And the truth is, I kind of did understand. Because when you're walking through fire, you start to recognize the smoke on other people. There was one afternoon in particular, right after my second infusion, when I sat in the waiting room, dizzy and nauseated, and staring blankly at the floor. An older man across from me looked over and said, "First round." I shook my head. Second. He nodded like we were two soldiers comparing wounds. Then he pointed to his port scar and said, "This one's from round 6. They called me the cockroach. Couldn't kill me." I laughed mostly because I had no energy left to cry. We talked for a few minutes. His name was Barry. He was 72, had been fighting leukemia for 5 years, and said the secret to surviving cancer was low expectations and high fiber. Then he told me his wife had left him after his diagnosis. Too much fear in her bones, he said. I don't blame her. I did, quietly, but I didn't say that. Before he was called in for blood work, he gave me a mint from his pocket and said, "You're not just a body kid. Don't let the scans tell you otherwise." Then he was gone. I kept that mint in my bag for weeks before I finally ate it during a particularly awful wave of nausea. It didn't help the sickness, but it helped me. Later that week, I ran into an old friend at the grocery store. She hadn't heard. Not yet. She hugged me, pulled back, looked at my hair, what was left of it, and said, "Oh my God, are you okay?" And I smiled and said, "Depends on the hour." She didn't know what to say after that. Most people don't. I used to hate those conversations, the pitying eyes, the awkward pauses, the sudden flood of too much honesty. But now I see it differently because pain cracks people open. And in those cracks, there's something strangely beautiful. A kind of intimacy that usually takes years of friendship, delivered in 5-minute bursts by total strangers. I've learned more about humanity in chemo chairs and pharmacy lines than I ever did in college or therapy. I've seen what fear does to people, how it distills them down to their barest truths. Some people run, some people overshare, some people show up with muffins and just sit quietly beside you. And some, like Barry, just toss you a mint and tell you not to become your medical chart. I think about that a lot because he's right. I'm not my tumor. I'm not my diagnosis. I'm not the infusion schedule or the blood work numbers or the weird tingling in my hands when I touch something cold. I'm still me, even if everyone around me sees something else now. Before bed that night, I wrote in my journal today, 3 strangers told me secrets. None of them were looking for advice. They just needed someone who wasn't afraid of broken things. And maybe that's who I am now. Not the strong one, not the brave one. Just the one who's still here, still listening, still soft even in the middle of the storm. There was a moment, a very specific moment, when I looked in the mirror and genuinely didn't recognize myself. It was a Tuesday morning. Nothing dramatic had happened that day. No new side effects, no medical emergencies. I had just gotten out of the shower and was brushing my teeth when I caught a glimpse of my reflection. And for a split second, I thought, who is that? My face was puffy. The steroids were doing their job, keeping my body afloat, inflamed and tired all at once. My skin had changed too duller, more fragile, like it forgot how to glow. My eyebrows were thinning. My eyes looked older, not wrinkled, just weary. Then there was the hair, or what remained of it. Patches, strands. Some mornings I'd wake up with tiny curls on my pillow like a dog had shed during the night. I'd started wearing head wraps more often, partly for warmth, partly because I couldn't keep pretending it didn't hurt. It wasn't just about vanity. It was about identity. When you're used to seeing yourself a certain way, a full head of hair, clear eyes, steady energy, it's jarring to watch that person fade. It's like grieving someone who still breathes. I didn't cry, I just stared. Not in horror, just in disorientation. I thought, this is the body I live in now. And then, unexpectedly, I felt something else. Not pride, not sadness, just neutrality. Like my brain had finally stopped fighting the transformation. It was a moment of quiet surrender, of understanding. This is what surviving looks like. Later that day, I tried on a beanie someone had knitted for me. Soft, dark green with a tiny silver thread woven through. It was warmer than anything I'd bought for myself. It made me feel hidden, but in a good way, like a fortress. When I stepped outside, the wind hit me differently. My skin felt closer to the world, somehow more exposed, but more alive. I walked slowly. I had to. Chemo fatigue was a whole body kind of exhaustion, the kind that crept into your bones like wet concrete. I passed a reflective window and caught my profile. Still didn't look like me, but I didn't flinch this time. That afternoon, I ran into my neighbor, the one with the loud cat and an uncanny ability to appear during my worst days. She looked me up and down, hesitated, then said, "You know, you look different, but stronger." I blinked. Stronger. She nodded, like someone who's been through something and came out smarter. I smiled politely, but something about her words stuck with me all day. Because, yeah, I did feel different. Not just on the outside, but in the way I carried myself. I wasn't worried about stupid things anymore, like what people thought of me, or whether I sounded too emotional, or whether I was saying the right thing at the right time. Cancer burned all of that away. Now I said what I meant. I cried when I needed to. I asked for help without shame. I listened more, hugged longer, held eye contact, said I love you without rehearsing it. That night I stood in front of the mirror again. Same reflection, same patchy hair, same swollen eyes. And I said out loud, "This is me, still here." It felt silly, like an affirmation from a self help book, but it also felt necessary. Like I needed to hear my own voice stake a claim. I pulled out an old photo album from under my bed, one I hadn't looked through in years. High school pictures, college, family vacations. A version of me with unbroken skin and a bright, unknowing smile. I didn't envy her. She was beautiful, but she hadn't earned her edges yet. I closed the album and wrote in my journal, "I'm not who I was, but I'm more than I expected." Then I thought about an odd fact I'd once heard, that during the 1800s, women mourning the death of a loved one would cut off a lock of their own hair and weave it into jewelry: a necklace, a brooch, a ring. Historians still argue whether it was about remembrance or control, one last piece of someone to hold on to. And I realized I'm not mourning my hair. I'm mourning the version of me that thought she was invincible. But I'm also honoring her by becoming someone braver. Before bed, I caught myself in the mirror one more time. I didn't smile. I didn't pose. I just nodded at my reflection like a soldier acknowledging another across a battlefield. "You're still here, still fighting, still becoming." It started with a walk, just a regular walk. Down the block around the corner past the bakery I used to go to before everything changed. The sun was out, my sneakers were tied. I had a hoodie on, headphones in, and a podcast playing something about the psychology of resilience. Irony, I guess. I didn't plan to go far. Chemo had drained me again. Every step felt like dragging a weighted blanket through honey. But I told myself, just 10 minutes. You don't have to be fast, just be moving. And then somewhere between the pharmacy and the post office, I smelled coffee. Real coffee, the good kind. Roasted strong with that subtle burnt edge that says, "Hey, you're still alive." I followed it, slowly, like a cartoon character floating through the air toward a pie on a windowsill. The cafe was small with big windows and exactly two people inside: a barista in his 20s with a messy bun and an old man reading a newspaper with a magnifying glass. I ordered a small black coffee and sat by the window, and for 5 whole minutes it felt like nothing was wrong. No needles, no scans, no impending appointments or pill schedules. Just sunlight, warm liquid, and the distant sound of someone frothing milk. I didn't stay long. I didn't have the energy. But that walk, that moment, became a lifeline. A reminder that my life wasn't entirely made of hospitals and blood tests, that there were still slivers of normalcy tucked between the cracks. So the next day I did it again, and the day after that. Not always to the cafe, sometimes just to the park bench, sometimes just to the mailbox and back. But I moved, slowly, deliberately, alive. It became my new ritual. And one morning, while sitting on that same cafe stool sipping decaf because my stomach couldn't handle caffeine anymore, I noticed something strange. I was smiling. Not forced, not for anyone else's benefit, just smiling. A small, internal kind of joy that bubbled up for no apparent reason, like my soul had decided to stretch its legs. I looked out the window and watched people walk by, holding hands, walking dogs, balancing toddlers and groceries and coffee cups. And instead of envy, I felt, okay, maybe even hopeful. Later that week, my nurse, the one with galaxy scrubs, asked me how I was feeling. And I said strangely peaceful, like I'm not waiting to feel better anymore. I'm just learning to live with the mess. She smiled. That's called grace. That word stuck with me. Because grace isn't something you achieve, it's something you allow. You don't earn it with effort. You open the door and let it in. And sometimes grace looks like a small moment of peace in the middle of chaos. A good day after a week of bad ones. A cup of coffee that stays down. A breeze through the window that doesn't sting your skin. That weekend, Hannah came over. We sat on the floor again, eating Thai takeout and watching reruns of game shows. She looked over at me halfway through an episode and said, "You seem different." "Good different?" I asked. She nodded. You're not fighting as much. You're just here. I thought about that because, yeah, I had stopped fighting not out of defeat, but out of understanding. I didn't have to win every day. I didn't have to pretend I was invincible. I just had to be. And that was enough. That night, I wrote in my journal. Today felt almost normal, and that's not nothing. I also scribbled down a historical note I remembered from college, something about how during the Great Fire of London in 1666, one bakery was left untouched. Everything else around it burned, but that one brick oven and its bread survived. Historians still debate how or why, but the story always stayed with me. Because even when everything falls apart, something soft can still survive. Something small, something human, something like bread or hope. It was a song that broke me, not a sad song, not some grand ballad about loss or love or leaving. Just a regular track, one of those upbeat, slightly cheesy tunes that you'd find on a gas station playlist. The kind that plays softly while you browse for gum and pretend you're not eavesdropping on someone's phone call. I was in the car, windows cracked, engine humming, stopped at a red light. The sun was doing that filtered golden late afternoon thing, casting long shadows over the dashboard. I had just finished another round of treatment the day before and felt depleted, hollow in the way only chemo can carve you out. And then the song came on. Something about the melody, the way it bounced the easy rhythm, the lyrics that made no sense and didn't need to hit me like a sucker punch to the chest. One moment I was staring at the traffic light. The next I was sobbing behind the wheel. Not gently, not silently. The kind of sobbing that makes your shoulders shake and fogs up the inside of your windshield. That turns breath into hiccups and hiccups into something close to laughter. The kind of crying that comes after you thought you'd cried it all out. I pulled over, parked, let my forehead fall against the steering wheel. I didn't even know why that song had cracked me open. It wasn't connected to a memory. It wasn't meaningful. It was just joyful, carefree, unapologetically alive. And that was the part that hurt. Because I remembered what it felt like to be carefree, to bop my head to some silly tune without thinking about whether my white blood cell count was high enough to go outside, without calculating how long I could be upright before the dizziness returned. Grief isn't always about death. Sometimes it's about the pieces of life that quietly slip away while you're busy surviving. That song reminded me of a version of me that used to sing out loud in traffic, who used to drum on the steering wheel with both hands and dance in her seat without caring who saw. And for a moment, I missed her so much it physically hurt. Eventually, I calmed down, wiped my face, took a deep breath that didn't go all the way down. Then I started the car again and let the song finish, this time listening with reverence. That night, I told Hannah about it. She didn't laugh. She didn't say you're being dramatic. She just nodded and said, "Yeah, music does that. It sneaks past your defenses." She was right. Music doesn't ask for permission. It doesn't knock. It walks straight into the rooms you locked and sits down on the floor like it belongs there. And sometimes that's exactly what you need to stop guarding the pain and just feel it. After dinner, I opened Spotify and made a playlist called Still Here. I filled it with songs that made me feel something. Not just the sad ones, not just the hopeful ones, but all the messy, contradictory, wonderful ones. Songs I could cry to, songs I could laugh to, songs I could scream into a pillow with, songs I could whisper with in the dark. There's something healing about sound, about rhythm, about melody moving through your body when everything else feels stuck. I wrote in my journal a song reminded me I'm still human, still cracked but still singing. That night, I slept better than I had in weeks. Not because the symptoms were gone. They weren't. The nausea was still lingering. My bones still ached. My skin still felt foreign. But something inside me had softened. Something had surrendered not to the disease, but to the life still happening around it. And in the middle of the night, I woke up just long enough to remember a weird fact I'd once read. In the trenches of World War I, soldiers would sometimes sing in the mud between shellings, not out of joy, but to remind each other they were still alive. Historians still argue whether it helped morale or was just a coping mechanism. But lying in bed listening to the hum of my apartment, the whisper of my playlist still echoing in my mind, I thought, maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe singing even through the tears is its own kind of resistance, a quiet rebellion against the darkness, a way of saying I'm still here, I still feel, I still have a voice. I've started writing letters again, not emails, not texts, actual handwritten letters, ink on paper, folded, stamped, sealed. Like I'm participating in some old ritual designed to make time feel slower and more real. It started with a letter to my future self, the one I'll open if I make it to remission. I wrote it on a Tuesday afternoon, curled up in my chair with Walter the bear sitting at my feet and the sun trying to sneak through the blinds. I wrote things like, "You made it. Somehow you made it. I hope you're not scared to be happy again." That was the first one. Then came letters to other people. To Hannah for always showing up. To my mom for holding me together without making it look like she was breaking. To Barry, the old man from the infusion center, even though I didn't know his last name. And then one to the person I might never meet. It started simply: "Dear stranger, if you're reading this, you've just been told something that changed everything." Because I remember that day. The diagnosis day. Capital D, capital D. The day everything tilted slightly off its axis and never straightened again. I remember the waiting room, the beige walls, the clock that ticked too loudly, the doctor who said it gently but couldn't make it sound less sharp. And I know someone else is having that day right now. So I wrote to them. I told them, "You'll feel like your body betrayed you. You'll Google things you shouldn't. You'll pretend to be fine, and you'll cry over toast. And one day something ridiculous will make you laugh, and you won't know whether that's progress or insanity. But it's something." I folded that letter, put it in a blank envelope, and tucked it away in a drawer I never open. I don't know what I'll do with it. Maybe I'll leave it in a hospital waiting room one day. Maybe I'll forget it's there. Either way, it's out of me now. Writing those letters felt like gathering pieces of myself scattered across this whole journey, little fragments of truth, confusion, grace, and grief. And collecting them into words gave them shape, gave me shape. Because if there's one thing cancer does, it's blur the edges. Days blend together. Feelings stack like laundry you never get around to folding. Your identity slips through the cracks as your schedule becomes a color-coded mess of appointments and pill alarms. But writing pins you down. It says I was here, I felt this, I survived this hour, even if the page never gets read. Later that night, I found myself staring at the ceiling again, a familiar ritual now, and thought about something I'd read once. During the Apollo 11 mission, the astronauts carried tiny metal discs inscribed with messages from world leaders. They left them on the moon knowing no one might ever read them. They did it anyway. Historians still argue whether that gesture mattered, but I think it did. Because sometimes the act of leaving a message behind, even one that might never be heard, is a form of hope. A way of saying I existed. I cared. I tried. That night, I wrote one more letter. This one was harder. It started, "If I don't make it." I didn't finish it that night. I couldn't. But I started it because that too is an act of bravery, acknowledging the possibility and choosing to speak into it anyway. Not with fear, but with intention. With love. I fell asleep with the pen still in my hand, the paper folded beside me like a bookmark in a chapter I wasn't quite ready to end. And in that sleep, deep, dreamless, and for once not interrupted by nausea or racing thoughts, I felt something I hadn't felt in a while. Peace. Not because everything was okay, but because I'd given the chaos somewhere to land. A place to live outside my body. A page, a sentence, a letter. Before I drifted off, I whispered just once. "They'll know I was here. They say strength is quiet." Not the kind that lifts weights or climbs mountains, but the kind that folds laundry after a panic attack. That replies to emails when your bones ache. That smiles at strangers when your heart is breaking open like soft fruit. I didn't believe that before, but I do now. Because I've started noticing my strength in the quietest moments, like the way I still make my bed every morning, even when I know I'll end up back in it within an hour. Or how I still put on mascara some days, even if the mirror makes me pause. Even if there are only 7 lashes left to work with. I see it in the way I refill my water bottle again and again, like hydration is my personal protest. I see it in the playlists I make. The ones I name things like still breathing or headscarf energy. And I see it in the calendar, the one I used to dread now, dotted with tiny stars I draw after each infusion. Not because I'm counting down, but because I'm counting through. There was a moment last week when Tasha, the nurse with the pink glasses, looked at my chart and said, "You're holding up better than most." And I blinked, surprised. "Better than most." She nodded. "You show up, you do the hard days, and you don't flinch." I didn't have a response to that because I do flinch, just not where people can see. But later at home, I let that comment settle into my chest like a warm cup of tea. Because it's easy to overlook your own progress when all you see are the losses, hair energy, wait time. But strength isn't always measured by what remains. Sometimes it's in what you choose to carry anyway. That night, my mom stopped by with soup. No reason, just soup. She sat at the edge of my bed and rubbed my feet while we watched the news with the volume too low to hear. At one point, she said, "You used to be afraid of everything when you were little. Needles, thunder, swimming pools." I laughed. "And now I'm afraid of literally none of those things." She looked at me. "No, Now you're afraid of bigger things, but you handle them. We didn't talk after that, but she stayed her hand resting on my ankle like an anchor. And I thought about all the people I've seen in treatment rooms wrapped in blankets, eyes closed, tubes snaking into their veins. None of us look like heroes, but we are. Quietly, without ceremony, without trumpets or capes, just people trying. Later that week, I got a message from a friend I hadn't talked to in years. She'd heard through someone else and reached out with a simple line: "You're showing me how to be brave." I stared at it for a long time, because no one tells you how weird it is to become someone else's source of strength while you're still patching yourself together with duct tape and peppermint tea. But it happens. You become the person others whisper about. She's going through something, but she's still smiling. You become the story someone tells when they're trying to be less afraid. I didn't ask for that, but I accept it. Because if my struggle can make someone else feel less alone, less broken, then maybe it's doing more than just hurting. Maybe it's helping. Before bed that night, I wrapped myself in the blue blanket from orientation and whispered, "I'm proud of you," to myself, out loud. It felt awkward, but it felt true. Then I remembered something odd from a documentary I watched once. In ancient Japan, there was a ritual where people would whisper their fears into paper lanterns and float them down rivers. The idea was that water could carry sorrow away. That darkness, when lit, became less powerful. Historians still debate whether it was spiritual or symbolic. But as I turned off the lights and let the quiet hold me, I thought, maybe strength is exactly that: a tiny flame in the middle of the dark, still burning, still beautiful, still here. The last morning was nothing special. No dramatic sunrise, no thunder rumbling through the sky, just a soft gray light spilling through my window and the sound of the kettle heating in the kitchen, same as always. My body was sore in that familiar way, like it had grown tired of holding itself up, but my mind was strangely calm. There was no countdown, no siren or warning or sudden feeling of this is it, just quiet. I made tea, sipped it slowly, thought about nothing in particular. Then, somewhere in the middle of the steam and silence, I remembered that first appointment. The beige room, the doctor's voice, the folder in my lap, that invisible line that split my life in two. And then I remembered everything in between: the nausea, the playlists, the bear named Walter, the apple that was too soft, the letters I wrote, the letters I never sent, the laughter I thought I'd lost, the walk to the cafe, the beanie, the mirror, the playlist, the mint Barry gave me, the weight of every moment I carried like a stone in my chest, and the weight that slowly turned into light. I got dressed, not in anything fancy, just a soft shirt, my favorite sweatpants, and a hoodie that still smelled like rain and fabric softener. I pulled the blanket from the chair and draped it over my shoulders, Walter tucked under one arm. Then I sat on the balcony, the cold air brushing my cheeks gently, not unkindly, but like a goodbye. And I watched the world move, slowly, delicately. A bird landed on the railing. A neighbor watered her plants. Somewhere, someone sneezed. It was all so normal. And that, I think, is what hit me hardest: the fact that life continues. That this spinning, chaotic, beautiful world just keeps going, even as we prepare to leave it. And I felt peace. Not the peace people talk about in movies. Not the glowing, dramatic, last breath kind of peace. Just a deep, quiet exhale. The kind that comes when you know you did your best. That you showed up. That you loved. That you laughed. That you kept showing up even when your body didn't want to. That you were scared and small and angry and alive. And that somehow, despite everything, you made a life out of it. I thought about the last letter I'd written, the one that started with, "If I don't make it." I'd finished it the night before. And the last line was simple: "Please remember, I wasn't just sick, I was still me." I hope someone finds it one day. I hope they read it and understand. Because I wasn't just a patient, or a file number, or a treatment plan. I was a daughter, a friend, a playlist maker, a writer of ridiculous to-do lists, a person who cried over toast and laughed during blood draws, a person who found grace in chemo chairs and humor in pharmacy lines, a person who even in her final days still said, "I'm still here." And now as my body begins to rest, really rest, I feel the weight leaving me. Not like falling, not like giving up, more like floating. Like finally setting something heavy down after holding it for too long. And I whisper one last time to no one and everyone: thank you. So if you're still listening, still here with me at the end of this long, winding road, thank you. Thank you for sitting with me in the silence. For letting me show you what it means to live fully, even in the face of something that threatens to take everything. For allowing me to be real, not polished, not brave all the time, just human. Take this with you. There will be days when everything hurts. when the world feels too bright or too loud or too indifferent. And on those days, I hope you remember that you're not alone, that there's strength in simply waking up, that surviving is not always loud or visible. Sometimes it's quiet, gentle, a single breath. And sometimes that's enough. Be kind to yourself, speak your pain, laugh at the absurdity, cry over toast if you need to. And when the world becomes too much, find your version of Walter. Find a blanket, a window, a stupid song on the radio. Let those things remind you you're still here. Even now, even when everything feels like it's slipping away, you are still made of light. And as you go on from this story into your own, I'll still be here in the background. Not as a voice, not as a memory, but as a quiet hand on your shoulder, a whisper on the wind, a reminder that you are loved, that you are enough, and that you too can live a life worth remembering. End of script. See you again tomorrow.